Have you ever tried growing plants from seed and noticed that the first leaves to emerge look nothing like the others? If you have, then congratulations. That's an excellent observation. These are seed leaves or cotyledons, and today we're going to do a deep dive into them. My name is Marshall, and welcome to the wonderful world of plants deep dive into cotyledons. Before we get too deep, let me give you a quick map of where we're headed in this dive. First, we'll break down what a cotyledon is, why it's important, and how it fits into a plant's life cycle. I'll show you how to identify them and what makes them different from a true leaf. Then, we'll shift focuses onto monocotyledons and dicotyledons, talking about what they are, looking at their differences, and how that factors into a plant's development and identification, as well as some examples. Lastly, we'll put what we learned to the test with a monocot versus dicot identification game. Each part of this deep dive will be timestamped to make navigation easier. With all that said, let's dive on in. I've been throwing around this word cotyledon a ton in these first few minutes, so let's get an actual definition. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, a cotyledon is essentially a seed leaf inside the embryo. That's that baby plant inside the seed. It helps feed the developing plant so it can start growing and eventually begin photosynthesizing. Sometimes a cotyledon stores food itself, or it helps the embryo use nutrients stored elsewhere in the seed. To break it down, cotyledons do four really important things for a young plant. First, they are usually the first structure to emerge from the seed. Second, they help kick off photosynthesis once the seedling reaches the light. Third, they feed the young plant using nutrients stored in the seed. And finally, they support the seedling during its earliest stages of growth. Now that we have a basic understanding of what cotyledon is, let's see where it fits into a plant's life cycle. When a seed begins to germinate, the cotyledons develop first. These seed leaves act like a tiny support system, giving the baby seedling the nutrients and energy it needs to grow before its true leaves appear. As a seedling develops, the cotyledons help bridge that gap between the seed stage and a fully photosynthesizing plant. Once the true leaves take over, the plant can make its own food and continue through its life cycle, growing into maturity. Now, let's talk about how to spot these seed leaves. Cotyledons often look different from true leaves of a plant. In both these images, you can see the rounded leaves closer to the soil. Those are the cotyledons. The serrated leaves above them are the plant's first set of true leaves. It is common for cotyledons to have a different shape than the true leaves, which is a useful way to help identify them on a young seedling. But be warned, just because there is a first set of leaves on a stem does not automatically mean they are the cotyledons. Let's dive a little deeper. Angiosperms, which are plants that flower, are grouped into two different arrangements based upon the number of cotyledons they have upon first emergence. They either fall under monocotyledons, monocots, or dicotyledons, dicots. Aside from the different number of seed leaves, both groups have distinctive characteristics which directly tie into their development. Well, now, let's look at each in their own respective light. Up first, monocotyledons. Monocotyledons are plants that have a single cotyledon when germinated. The characteristics of this group include parallel leaf veins. These are veins that run vertically along the length of the leaf, so think up and down. A fibrous root system. This is more of a lateral branching root system rather than one main taproot or a central root. The vascular tissue is the tissue that moves sugars and water through the plant, the xylem and phloem. So in monocotyledons, they do not have a specific arrangement and can be described as either scattered or irregular. The flowering parts of monocotyledons are in multiples of 3. So this means you can have 3 petals, 3 sepals, or 3 anthers. In this close-up of a lily is a good example. As you can see, there are 3 petals, 3 sepals, but there are also 6 anthers, which is a multiple of 3. So some good examples of monocots include corn, rice, wheat, all grasses, orchids, and even bananas. Now, dicotyledons. Dicotyledons are plants that have 2 cotyledons when they germinate. The images we saw in the identification portion were examples of dicotyledons. So, the characteristics of this group are netted leaf veins. You can see 2 great examples of this on the images on the right. One is of a birch leaf, the other is of a maple leaf. They have a large central root called a taproot. This grows vertically deep into the soil with smaller branching roots growing from it. Vascular tissue. That tissue that transports water and nutrients throughout the plant is arranged in a neat circular pattern. In woody dicots, this arrangement is part of that tree growth rings. So, for flowering parts, they are usually in multiples of 4 or 5. This here is a great example because it has 5 petals and 5 stigma lobes. That's those little red parts in the center of the flower. It is also important to note that most true trees are dicots. Keep this in mind for later. So, common dicots are oaks, maples, roses, tomatoes, and even sunflowers. Let's look at monocots and dicots side by side for a direct comparison. So, when it comes to seed leaves, monocots have a single seed leaf, whereas dicots have two. The leaf veins in monocotyledons are parallel, so that tip to base, that vertical, where in dicots it is a netted pattern. The root system of monocots is fibrous, it's more lateral with lots of branching roots off that lateral kind of system, where in dicots it is very much dependent on that taproot or that single main root. So, for the vascular arrangement in monocotyledons, it is irregular, there's no real pattern to it, whereas in dicots, it is a circular and very distinctive pattern. And the flower parts of monocots are multiples of 3, where in dicots are multiples of 4 or 5. It is important to note that not every plant will show all of these traits perfectly. But taken together, these differences help us quickly identify whether a plant is a monocot or dicot when we look at the leaves, the roots, stems, flowers, and possibly the vascular arrangement if we can see that. Now, let's look at examples from each and break them down as if we stumbled upon them while on a walk. So, for this first one, since we cannot see the root system or the vascular arrangement, let's figure it out from the characteristics we can see. Looking at the leaves, we notice that the veins are running vertically throughout the entire blade, so that up and down pattern. Now, for the flowers, we can see a first sepal, a second sepal, and a third sepal. And we can see a first petal, second petal, and a third petal, both multiples of 3. So, parallel veins and flower parts in multiples of 3 makes this a monocotyledon. For reference, this is an orchid, and orchids have a specialized third petal, which is often called the lip and is the bottom part of that flower. Let's jump to the other side now. So we could cut the plant in half to see its vascular structure or dig it up to identify its root system, but both of those would undoubtedly disturb our plant pal. Instead, let's focus on those other characteristics we can talk about and see. So, looking at the leaves, we can see a mid vein and then has side veins running laterally to the leaf margins off of that, with even smaller veins coming off of those veins. This would be considered a netted leaf pattern. But before we jump to conclusions, let's look at the flowers. We can see both examples have 5 petals making up the flower. So, just from what we can see, the netted leaf veins and the flower parts of 5, we can classify this as a dicotyledon or dicot. For reference, this is a hibiscus plant. Now it's time to play that identification game I mentioned earlier in the deep dive. I hope you've been paying attention because we're about to put what you've learned to the test. We'll do 3 rounds. In each, you'll see a picture of a plant, either a monocot or a dicot. Use the visible characteristics we talked about, the vein arrangement in the leaves, and the number of flower parts to figure out which type it is. Bonus points if you can name the plant. If you're ready, let's dive into round 1. All right, everybody, eyes on screen, it's round 1. Remember to use everything you can see, check out those leaf vein patterns, and count the flower parts. So, what do we think? Netted leaf veins and flower parts in multiples of 5? You'd be correct if you said this was a dicot. For bonus points, can you tell me what kind of flower this is? I'll give you a few seconds. All right, so this is a geranium. It's one of my favorite and my father's favorite plants. If you got both of those correct, great job. If not, no worries. All right, round two. Check out those leaf veins and count the flower parts. So, you have an answer, or is it more of a guess? Let's see how you did. Here, we can see parallel leaf veins. Remember, those are the veins that run up and down. And we can see flower parts in multiples of 3, making this a monocotyledon. Now, take a few more seconds to guess the plant. So, this is a spider plant, and I've got to say, it's one of my favorite plants of all time. If you got both right, awesome job. If not, no worries. Just keep practicing. Let's move on to our final round. All right, everyone, eyes on screen. Round 3, our final round, is coming up. I'll warn you, this one is a bit tricky. Remember to use those leaf vein patterns and count the flower parts. Take a few seconds for this one and pause the video if you need to. So, are you stumped, or do you have a good idea which category this falls under? Let's change it up a bit and first identify what this plant is. It's a palm. So, notice how I didn't say tree? While palms may look like trees, they do not have the characteristics of a true tree. Let's look at palms from a different angle. Not this one or this. Let's try this. Perfect. Here is a cross section of a palm. Notice the lack of tree rings? That's because a palm's vascular arrangement is scattered, not in those distinctive rings you see in true trees. Now, look at a leaflet. See how those parallel veins run vertically from the tip to the base, that up and down pattern? How about this illustration of a root system? Notice the lateral spreading fibrous system? How about that lack of a distinctive taproot like Dicots, true trees, have? Honestly, all the proof is here in the picture of the palm seedling. Here we see a palm as it first emerges from the soil and a few weeks later. Notice there is a single cotyledon. This shows that palms are monocotyledons, monocots, and not true trees. And with that final twist about palms, we've seen just how fascinating cotyledons can be and how much they tell us about the plants around us. All right, everybody, that's a wrap on the deep dive into cotyledons. Today we looked at what a cotyledon is, how cotyledons fit into a plant's life cycle and what they look like, the differences between monocotyledons and dicotyledons, how to distinguish between the two, and even discovered that palms aren't true trees. Thank you for taking this dive with me. You can follow the Wonderful World of Plants on Instagram to stay up to date with everything going on. You can also check out our Substack for weekly writings about plants we love and sometimes don't even know why. That's it for today. Go outside, look a little closer, and you'll start to see the amazing hidden patterns that make plants so amazing. And remember, plants are way cooler than they let on. Thank you.